Hey guys, welcome back. If you're ready to chill and enjoy a good story, you're in the right place. Let's get started.
The first sound I remember is the chair scraping back. A second later, my 8-year-old daughter was on the ballroom floor. Sophie had only knocked food from Linda Parker's plate by accident. She had already started saying sorry when my mother-in-law shoved her out of the chair with both hands. Then Linda threw the rest of the food onto my daughter's dress and said, "Rude little girl, just like your mother." I did not scream. I dropped to the floor, pulled Sophie against me, and felt her shaking. Tell me honestly, would that have felt normal to you? That was how Lauren's wedding stopped being a wedding for me. It was held in a ballroom in Austin, Texas. White tablecloths, warm lights, music soft enough to sit under the sound of voices and silverware. Nearly 200 guests. Our table was close to the front. I was there with my husband, Ryan Parker, our daughter Sophie, my mother-in-law Linda Parker, and my father-in-law Thomas Parker. From a distance, everything looked fine. At our table, it never was. I had been married to Ryan for years, long enough to know how his family worked. Linda did not need raised voices to control a room. She used correction, disapproval, and that calm little smile that made cruelty sound reasonable. She watched everything: how I held a serving dish, how I spoke to Sophie, how much I answered back. She always found a way to make me feel smaller, then acted shocked if I objected. Thomas almost never interrupted her. He sat quietly and let it happen. Ryan knew exactly what his mother was like. He knew when she was crossing a line, but every time it mattered, he found a way to stand beside her instead of beside me. Sometimes he defended her. Sometimes he softened it. Sometimes he just asked me to let it go. The result was always the same. I kept telling myself I could manage it. I stayed because I wanted stability for Sophie. I stayed because I kept hoping the family would change. I stayed because, after enough years of being told I was too sensitive, you start checking your own instincts before you trust them. That night, Sophie was trying so hard to be perfect. She loved dressing up. She had been excited about Lauren's wedding for days. In the ballroom, she sat very straight in her chair, smoothed her dress over her knees, and whispered every question she had to me, instead of speaking at full volume. Before dinner, she leaned close and asked, "Am I doing okay?" I squeezed her hand under the table and said, "You're doing perfectly." Linda heard me. She gave a small laugh and said, "We'll see." That was the first thing that didn't sit right. Sophie was only 8, but she already understood something I hated admitting. Around Linda, she had to watch herself. I could see it in the way she looked at Linda before she reached for her glass, in the way her shoulders tightened whenever Linda turned toward her, in the way she kept checking my face, as if I might be able to warn her before something went wrong. Even at a wedding, even in a ballroom full of people, she was not simply relaxed, she was careful. I wish I had listened harder to that feeling. Dinner was being served. Plates moved in and out. Guests were smiling toward the front of the room. A server passed behind us. Someone laughed at another table. Sophie reached carefully across her place, setting at the same moment Linda shifted her plate. It happened in one quick motion. Food slid off Linda's plate and onto Linda's dress. Sophie froze. Then she looked up immediately and said, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." It was so clearly an accident that no honest person could have mistaken it for anything else. Linda did not ask for a napkin. She did not calm down. She stood up so fast the chair legs dragged over the floor, reached towards Sophie, and shoved her hard enough that my daughter hit the carpet beside the table. Before Sophie could even push herself up, Linda scooped the spilled food and flung it onto my daughter's dress. The room went silent. That silence is still with me. Nearly 200 people watched an adult woman stand over a child and punish her for an accident. Sophie stared up in shock first, as if her mind had not caught up yet. Then her face crumpled. Then she looked at me. I moved before I even thought. I knelt on the carpet, pulled her into my arms, and felt her sob against my shoulder. Her hands grabbed at my dress so tightly they hurt. "Mom," she kept saying. Just that one word. Over and over. Linda pointed down at her and said, "Maybe now she'll learn." That line was cold enough on its own. Then she looked at me and added, "She acts exactly like you." Public humiliation can happen very fast. One push, one ruined dress, one cruel sentence, one room full of witnesses pretending they are not involved yet. But the damage lands everywhere at once. On the child, on the mother, on every person watching who suddenly has to decide whether this is discipline or something much uglier. I knew what it was. The harder part was realizing I was about to see Ryan make the same choice he always made. I looked up from the floor and found his face across the table. He was already moving. Not toward Sophie, toward Linda. That was the moment the last of my doubt started to die. I had spent years hoping he would choose us when it mattered most. In that ballroom, with our daughter on the floor, I finally understood how much that hope had cost. Ryan stepped toward us, but not like a father rushing to his frightened child. He looked at me and said, "Emily, enough, enough." Sophie was crying on the floor in my arms. Food was still on her dress. Linda was still standing over us. And Ryan's first instinct was to stop me from reacting, not stop his mother from what she had done. Would you have ignored that? I stood up slowly, keeping one arm around Sophie. "She pushed an 8-year-old to the floor," I said. Ryan lowered his voice. "You're making this worse." Linda changed her expression so quickly it would have impressed me if it had not been so ugly. A second earlier she had looked furious. Now she pressed one hand to her own dress and softened her voice, like she was the injured one. "I was humiliated in front of everyone," she said. "Your daughter did that on purpose, and you taught her to disrespect me." That was the moment I realized she had no shame about what she had done. Her only concern was losing control of the story. Sophie buried her face against me. Her body was still trembling. Then she looked up with wet eyes and asked, in the smallest voice, "Am I bad?" I bent down and held her face between my hands. "No," I said. "You did nothing wrong." Linda gave a short laugh. "Of course you'd tell her that. There are sentences that reveal more than people intend." That one did. Ryan kept his eyes on me. "Take her to the restroom and calm down." "Not, Mom, what are you doing?" "Not, Sophie, are you hurt?" "Not, we're leaving." "Calm down," I asked him. "Did you see your mother put her hands on our daughter?" He answered too fast. "It was an accident. Sophie's spill was an accident. Linda's shove was not." That was the second thing that changed the night for me. Ryan did not even hesitate. He moved straight to denial, straight to defense, straight to the version that kept his mother safe and left our daughter carrying the blame. I said, "No, you saw it." His mouth tightened. "This is not the place." I looked around the ballroom. Guests at nearby tables had stopped eating. A bridesmaid was standing still a few feet away, holding her bouquet at her waist. Someone near the back had gone quiet mid-sentence. The music kept playing, which made the whole thing feel even harsher, a wedding song under a child's crying. Linda folded her napkin with exaggerated care. "Emily always makes everything bigger than it is." That word again, bigger. As if the problem was not the harm itself, but my refusal to shrink it. Sophie had stopped crying hard by then, which worried me more. Her breathing was uneven, and she would not look at Linda at all. She was staring at the edge of the tablecloth, at a smear of sauce near a plate, at anything except the woman who had just shoved her down in front of hundreds of people. I touched her shoulder and said, "Stay with me." She nodded. That nod broke something open in me. For years, I had tried to keep peace around Ryan's family. I told myself I could absorb Linda's comments. I told myself Thomas's silence was weakness, not approval. I told myself Ryan would eventually choose us when it mattered most. I told myself I was staying patient for Sophie, but an 8-year-old had just been knocked to the floor, covered in food, and made to feel like she had earned it. "Maybe you see it differently." I couldn't. Lauren came over then, her face pale. "Emily, are you okay?" she asked. Then she saw Sophie's dress. "What happened?" Before I could answer, Linda said, "This is family business." Lauren looked at the overturned chair, then at Sophie, then at me. "A child is crying on the floor at my wedding," she said. "That looks like everyone's business. That mattered." A bridesmaid stepped closer, too. So did the venue manager. I could feel the pressure changing in the room. Linda was no longer the only one framing what had happened. Ryan moved closer and said, through clenched teeth, "Emily, sit down." I looked straight at him. No, I should have noticed, long before that night, how often he used that tone on me when his mother was involved. Not with her, with me. The command never went in her direction. It always came toward me, as if my job in the family was to absorb the damage and keep the picture neat. Linda said, "You're embarrassing yourself." I answered, "You shoved a child." Ryan took one more step. His face changed. He was not thinking about Sophie. He was thinking about the guests, the whispers, the broken image of a controlled, respectable family. "Stop this right now," he said. "Stop protecting her?" I asked. Everything after that happened fast and slow at the same time. Ryan lifted his hand and slapped me across the face. The sound cut through the ballroom. My head snapped to the side. The sting came first. Then Sophie screamed. Linda laughed. Then she said, loud enough for people around us to hear, "She deserved that." That was it. That was the end of every excuse I had made for this family. My daughter was clinging to me, shaking, and watching every adult around her learn what kind of violence would be tolerated if no one stopped it. I looked down at Sophie. She was white with fear, her fingers digging into my arm. If I stayed quiet after that, I would be teaching her the same lesson they had been teaching me for years. Stay small, doubt yourself, protect the people who hurt you, call it family. Was I supposed to stay quiet after that? I reached into my bag, took out my phone, and unlocked it. Ryan stared at me. "What are you doing?" I looked him in the eye and said, "What I should have done the first time your mother crossed a line." I called the police from the table. Not in the hallway. Not outside. Not after a private discussion with Ryan. I stood there in that ballroom, with Sophie pressed against my side and my face still burning, and I told the dispatcher exactly what had happened. "My daughter was assaulted at a wedding," I said, "and my husband just hit me." The words changed the room. People can ignore a family argument. They can pretend not to understand a cruel comment. But once the truth is named plainly, everyone has to decide where they stand. Ryan reached toward my wrist. "Don't do this." I pulled my hand back. "Don't touch me again." My voice was calm. That made him stop. Linda folded her arms. "You're being hysterical." "No," I said into the phone. "I'm reporting what happened." The dispatcher asked for the location. I gave her the ballroom in Austin. She asked if my daughter was injured. I looked down at Sophie's arm where the skin had gone red from the fall. I looked at her dress, smeared and stained. "Yes," I said. "She was shoved to the floor." Ryan lowered his voice, trying to sound reasonable. "Emily, hang up. We can talk at home." Home. That word landed badly. Home was where Linda's behavior got minimized. Home was where Ryan asked me to let things go because his mother didn't mean it that way. Home was where Sophie had already learned to watch a room before she moved in it. I said, "No, we are not taking this home." While I was on the phone, Linda leaned toward Thomas and said something under her breath. He looked down at the table instead of at me or Sophie. He stayed in his chair and let silence do his work for him. The venue manager had come over by then. "Do you need somewhere private while you wait?" he asked. Before I could answer, Linda said, "There is no reason to turn this into a spectacle." The manager looked at her once and said, "A child was shoved to the floor in front of guests. It already is one." Lauren came back too, pale and steady. "Stay here," she told me. "Let them come to you." Ryan turned toward her. "You want police at your wedding?" Lauren did not back down. "You hit your wife at my wedding." There are moments when shame changes direction. Until then, Ryan and Linda had been trying to place it on me for reacting, on Sophie for spilling food, on anyone but themselves. After Lauren said that, the shame began moving back where it belonged. Sophie was quieter now, but it was not relief. It was shock. She had one hand twisted into the fabric of my dress, and she kept watching the ballroom doors. I knelt enough to meet her eyes. "Are you hurt anywhere else?" "My arm," she whispered. Then, after a pause, "My tummy feels funny," I said. "You stay right with me." She nodded and asked, very softly, "Is Grandma mad because I spilled?" The question tore through me because she was still trying to find the mistake that made an adult's violence make sense. I told her, "No. You made an accident. That is different." Linda heard me and said, "She needs consequences." Sophie flinched without looking up. 3 guests came forward while we waited for the police. No one had to beg them. A woman in a dark dress said, "I saw Linda push her." A man near the aisle said, "She threw food on the little girl after." Another guest said, "And Ryan slapped you." I saw that. That mattered more than Linda understood. Ryan tried once more. "Think about Sophie," he said. "She doesn't need police involved." I looked at him and answered, "She needed adults who would protect her." He had no reply to that. The officers arrived quickly. 2 of them walked into the ballroom with the kind of calm that makes everyone else fall quiet. Guests stepped aside. Music had been lowered. One officer approached me first. He looked at Sophie, then at my face. "Are you Emily Parker?" "Yes." "Can you tell me what happened?" I told it in order. We were seated near the front. Sophie accidentally knocked food from Linda's plate. Sophie apologized right away. Linda shoved Sophie off the chair. Linda threw food onto Sophie. I went to my daughter. Linda blamed us. Ryan slapped me. The officer asked Sophie gently, "Did your grandmother push you?" Sophie pressed against me and nodded. He asked, "Did she throw food on you too?" "Yes," Sophie whispered. The second officer asked if I had any visible injury. I showed the red mark on my face. I showed Sophie's stained dress and her arm. The guests who had offered to speak stepped forward immediately. Lauren did too. The bridesmaid did too. Linda looked stunned then, as if she could not believe people were choosing truth over convenience. Thomas still said very little. That silence was its own answer. One officer moved Ryan aside. Another told Linda to remain where she was. Ryan started saying emotions were high and this was a family matter. The officer cut him off and said, "It became a police matter when physical violence happened." I needed to hear that spoken plainly. Would you have gone home with them after that? While statements were being taken, Sophie leaned into me and watched Ryan from a distance. She did not ask if he was angry. She only asked one thing. "Are we leaving with them?" I knew what she meant. Not the car, the life. I put my hand over hers and said, "No." That was the first promise I made that night that I would keep. Once the officers separated us, the room stopped feeling like Linda's stage. That mattered more than I expected. For years, she had controlled everything through tone, guilt, and certainty. If she said she was disrespected, the family moved around that claim. If she said I was too emotional, Ryan pushed me to apologize. If she said silence was best for everyone, Thomas disappeared into it. But that night, in that ballroom, she could not arrange the scene anymore. Too many people had seen too much. The officers took statements one at a time. I repeated the sequence exactly as it happened. Sophie spilled food by accident. She apologized immediately. Linda shoved her off the chair. Linda threw food on her. Ryan slapped me when I would not back down. I stayed with the facts because the facts were enough. One officer asked Sophie if she wanted to sit down somewhere quieter. She shook her head and stayed next to me. That alone said plenty. She wanted one thing: distance from everyone who had hurt her. Lauren stood close by, still in her wedding clothes, but her voice never wavered when the officers asked what she had seen after she reached the table. The bridesmaid gave her statement too. The venue manager described the room when he arrived. 3 guests who did not know me well enough to have any reason to take sides still spoke up. Each version confirmed the same truth. Sophie had been shoved. Food had been thrown on her. I had been slapped. Truth can be very quiet when several people say the same thing. Linda tried to soften it. "I lost my balance," she said. The girl was already moving. One of the officers looked at her and asked, "And the food?" Linda had no good answer for that. Ryan tried a different angle. My wife was escalating the situation. The officer answered, "Did you strike her?" Ryan hesitated. That pause told the truth before his mouth did. "Yes," he said finally, "but—" The officer stopped him there. That was one of the clearest moments of the night. Not dramatic, not loud, just a line being drawn where one should have been drawn long before. Thomas stood off to the side through most of it, hands together, face flat. He was not shouting. He was not defending Linda with big speeches, but he was still doing what he had always done, staying still while harm unfolded, as if that kept him clean. It did not. Sophie looked over at him once, then away again. Children notice who speaks and who does not. They notice who lets things happen. They remember. After the statements were finished, the officers told me what would happen next. Ryan was being handled for assault in public. I was told how to document everything and how to move forward with a protective order. Hearing those words did not make me feel dramatic. They made me feel sane. For years, I had been trained to question my own reality around that family. That night, in front of witnesses, the reality was written down. Linda's face changed when she understood the night was no longer living only inside family memory. It was in witness accounts and in a police report. She could not smooth it over later. She could not call me sensitive and make that erase anything. She stepped toward me once and said, "You are destroying this family." I kept my voice level. "No, I'm ending what you've been allowed to do inside it." That was the first time I said it that plainly. Ryan tried one last time to pull me back into the old pattern. "Emily, don't make permanent decisions because of one awful night. One awful night." As if Sophie's fear had begun under those ballroom lights, as if a child learns to go quiet around certain people for no reason at all. I looked at him and understood something final. He still thought the problem was my response, not his hand, not Linda's shove, not the lesson his daughter had just watched with her own eyes. That lesson was simple and brutal. Grandma can hurt you. Dad will protect Grandma. Mom will be told to absorb it. I could not let Sophie grow up inside that. So I did not argue anymore. I asked the officer if Sophie and I were free to leave once they were done with us. He said yes. Lauren touched my arm and quietly asked if I needed help getting out without going back past the table. I told her yes. The venue manager arranged it without hesitation. That kindness mattered because it was so simple. No one told me to protect appearances. No one asked me to wait until morning. They simply looked at what had happened and treated it like it mattered. As Sophie and I were being led away, Linda called after me. "You're overreacting." I turned once and answered, "No, I'm done pretending." That line stayed with me because it was not just about that night. It was about every smaller moment that had led there, every insult I had swallowed, every excuse I had accepted. Every time I had watched Ryan choose comfort over courage and told myself I could survive one more family dinner for Sophie's sake. Not anymore. Sophie and I left the ballroom together. Her stained dress brushed against my leg as we walked. My cheek still stung. The hallway outside felt colder and quieter than it should have after a wedding. She held my hand with both of hers. Then she asked, "Are we in trouble?" I stopped walking, knelt in the hallway, and said, "No, we are getting out." She searched my face for a second, then nodded. That nod was small. It was also the first real shift in power I had felt in years. Because Linda no longer controlled the meaning of the night. Ryan no longer controlled whether I stayed. And I was no longer asking permission to protect my child. Would you have gone back after that? I wouldn't. 10 days later, I filed for divorce. I used the police report and the witness statements to protect myself and Sophie. What came out in the process made something else painfully clear. The wedding had not been a single explosion with no warning. Sophie had been living under pressure from that side of the family for longer than I wanted to admit. The public violence had only exposed what private tension had already taught her. That truth made every decision after easier. Not painless, but easier. 10 days after the wedding, I filed for divorce. By then, the shock had settled into something steadier. Not peace, not relief, direction. I had a police report. I had witness statements. I had the memory of my daughter asking if she was bad after an adult shoved her to the floor in front of hundreds of people. I did not need any more proof that silence was no longer protection. I used the report and the statements to protect both of us. Ryan did not become a different man after the wedding. That was another truth I had to face. He knew what his mother had done. He knew what he had done. But even then, he kept reaching for the same shelter. Excuses, timing, family pressure. The suggestion that one terrible public night should not define a marriage. One terrible public night had not defined it. It had exposed it. That difference mattered. For years, I had tried to separate Ryan from Linda in my mind. I told myself he was caught in her orbit. I told myself he was weak, not cruel. I told myself he loved Sophie, even if he failed us in the moments that counted. Maybe some of that was true in pieces, but none of it changed what my daughter had seen with her own eyes. When Linda hurt Sophie, Ryan protected Linda. When I protected Sophie, Ryan hit me. There was no safer interpretation left. Would you have called that a marriage worth saving? The legal process brought another hard truth into the light. What happened at the wedding was not just one explosion in an otherwise healthy family. Sophie had been under pressure from that side of the family for longer than I had wanted to admit. Not one dramatic secret. Not some hidden twist. Just a pattern. A child learning to stay careful. A child learning to watch adults before she moved. A child learning that keeping peace around certain people mattered more than her own comfort. Once I stopped minimizing it, I could see the line clearly. It ran through birthdays and dinners and visits. It ran through Ryan asking me to let comments go. It ran through Thomas looking away. It ran through every moment Sophie got quiet for reasons a child should not need to understand. That realization was painful. It was also freeing. The court gave me custody of Sophie. Ryan was granted supervised visitation only. Linda was barred from contacting either of us. I remember hearing those outcomes and feeling something I had not felt in a long time. Space. Clear, legal, undeniable space. The boundaries I had never been allowed to hold inside that family were finally written where they could not be argued away over dinner. Ryan could no longer tell me I was overreacting. Linda could no longer demand access and call it love. Thomas could no longer stand in silence and pretend silence was neutral. The structure had changed, and because it changed, Sophie finally had room to breathe. We moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Round Rock, Texas. It was not grand. It was not dramatic. It was safe. That mattered more than anything. 2 bedrooms. Quiet doors. No one dropping by with opinions. No one using family loyalty as a tool. No one making my daughter study the room before she reached for a glass. The first night there, Sophie stood in the doorway of her new room for a long time before walking in. The room was simple, but it was hers. She looked at the window, the bed, the closet. Then she turned and asked, "We live here now?" "Yes," I said. "Just us?" "Yes." She nodded very slowly, like she was testing whether the answer might change if she waited long enough. That small pause told me how much uncertainty she had been carrying. She started therapy after that. I will not speak for every step of her healing, because that belongs to her. But I can say this. Safety changed her first. Before any big words did, safety changed her. The tightness in her shoulders began to ease. Her voice stopped catching before simple questions. She laughed more easily. She stopped watching every adult face in the room before speaking. Healing was not instant, but it was visible. That mattered to me more than any speech about closure ever could. There were nights she still asked hard questions. Why did Grandma do that? Why didn't Dad stop her? Did I ruin the wedding? Those questions came at quiet times. In the car, at bedtime, standing beside me in the kitchen. I answered each one as carefully and honestly as I could, because children can live with painful truths better than they can live with confusion. I told her, "You did not ruin anything." I told her, "What happened was not your fault." I told her, "Adults are responsible for their own choices." And when she asked, "Why didn't Dad help us?" I did not give her a comforting lie I could not stand behind. I told her, "He should have. Maybe some people would have softened that more. I couldn't. Not after everything." Would you have told a child anything less clear? As the months passed, my own life began to change too. I was promoted at work. On paper, that sounds separate from the rest of this story. It was not. For years, so much of my energy had gone into managing damage, anticipating tension, recovering from scenes, and questioning my own judgment. Once that constant pressure was gone, I could finally stand on my own feet without apologizing for taking up room. I was still tired sometimes, still angry sometimes, still surprised by what calm felt like, but calm became real. Not the false quiet of keeping other people comfortable, not the careful silence of surviving a family system built around one person's control. Real calm, the kind where a child can eat dinner without fear, the kind where a mother does not have to scan every expression in the room, the kind where home means safety instead of negotiation. I still think about that ballroom sometimes. The warm lights, the white tablecloths, the overturned chair, Sophie on the floor in her dress, Linda standing over her, Ryan choosing his mother while his daughter cried. Some images never leave you once they settle in, but another image stays with me too. The hallway after we left, my daughter holding my hand with both of hers. Her question, "Are we in trouble?" My answer, "No, we are getting out." That was the real turning point. Not because it fixed everything that night, because I meant it. Would you have waited any longer? I couldn't. And the strangest part is this. Once I stopped protecting the people who were hurting us, life became simpler. Hard at first, yes. Lonely in places, yes. But cleaner, truer, less noise, less confusion, less bargaining with what I already knew. Sophie did not need a perfect life from me. She needed a safe one. She needed one parent willing to believe what was in front of her own eyes. One parent willing to say that violence is violence, even when family tries to rename it. One parent willing to choose her over appearances. In the end, that was the only choice that mattered. Linda lost access. Ryan lost control. Thomas lost the shelter of silence. And Sophie got her childhood back piece by piece. So did I. The last thing I remember from that whole chapter is not the slap, or the laughter, or even the ballroom floor. It is Sophie sleeping peacefully in our apartment in Round Rock, with her bedroom door half open and the hall light low. No one was waiting to shame her. No one was asking me to keep peace at her expense. For the first time, her safety came first. That was enough.